The phone rang just as the Savannah sun cut through my office windows, spilling gold across mahogany. I answered, expecting routine details about my brother-in-law's wedding. Instead, planner's voice, calm but trembling, "Your husband canceled your invitation, but asked us to keep the $85,000 you paid." My hand froze around the phone. 85,000. My name, erased. I whispered, steady but shaking inside, "Cancel the entire wedding." A pause, then the words that cracked everything open, "But ma'am, you're not the bride." 15 years of marriage, undone in one call. What my husband didn't know was that every vendor he thought he controlled ultimately answered to me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed, betrayed, or made to feel invisible, or maybe you've experienced the deepest loneliness, or that unbearable pain of losing those you love most, share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because maybe the next story will remind you of your own strength. The line went dead, but the silence in my office thundered louder than any words. I set the phone down on polished mahogany, staring out at the Savannah River winding past moss-draped oaks, the water glinting like it knew more than I did. The city hummed 32 floors below, unaware that my marriage had just fractured with surgical precision. I am Olivia Carter. For 15 years, I built Carter Hospitality from a cramped apartment with second-hand furniture into a southern empire. Resorts on Tybee Island, catering firms across Charleston, hotels in Jacksonville, brick by brick, deal by deal, while family dinners still introduced me as Daniel's wife who dabbles in events. I whispered my success, and they shouted me down. Maybe it was easier to let them believe I was small. Until today. My office bore the proof they refused to see: acquisition papers framed on the walls, crystal awards catching the sunlight, quarterly reports spread across my desk showing profit margins that outpaced Fortune 500 veterans. Yet inside my own home, I was invisible. A woman whose millions bought family celebrations, but not a seat at the table. And now, that erasure had become official. My husband didn't just take my money. He took my name off the guest list, as if I were a stain to be scrubbed out. But you can only erase someone you don't truly see. And Daniel had never seen me at all. 3 weeks earlier, I'd sat at that same dinner table where the seed of betrayal was planted, and I should have known then, silence was the trap they were laying for me. The Carter dining room always smelled of rosemary chicken and forced civility. That night, amber light from the chandelier pooled over polished silverware, each reflection sharp enough to cut. Olivia sat at the far end of the mahogany table, her glass of wine untouched, while conversation rippled around her like a current she wasn't meant to swim in. Luke, the groom-to-be, leaned forward, his sleeves rolled and his eyes tired. "We've been running the numbers," he said, pushing away his plate. "Between Emily's student loans and the mortgage, a real wedding feels impossible." His voice cracked, just enough to draw sympathy from the table. Emily placed her hand over his. "We don't want much. Just a chance to celebrate properly. But right now, it's courthouse or nothing." Paige, ever the self-appointed diplomat, sighed theatrically. "Family deserves better than folding chairs in a courthouse basement." "But maybe," she tilted her head, glancing not at Luke but at Olivia, "maybe there's another way." All eyes turned, subtle but heavy, toward Olivia. Daniel's especially, expectant, sharp, the look of a man waiting for his wife to play her part. Olivia set her fork down gently. "They see me as a vault, not a sister-in-law. An open checkbook with a heartbeat." Daniel cleared his throat. "Olivia knows people. Venues, caterers. She's good at finding deals." He smiled, warm to everyone else, but cold steel aimed straight at her. A silence stretched, broken only by the clinking of Margaret's crystal bracelet as she poured more wine. Olivia's chest tightened. "Deals? I own the companies they beg discounts from. Yet at this table, I'm still the helper, never the builder." Luke's voice softened. We just want something decent, Liv. Something our families can remember. But we're tapped out. $5,000 is all we've got if we sacrifice everything else. The words hung in the air, heavy as humidity on a Savannah summer night. Olivia nodded, forcing a small smile. I see. Her pulse drummed against her temples. 5,000 to them is sacrifice. To me, 85,000 is a Tuesday invoice. After dinner, as the plates were cleared and laughter filled the hallway, Teresa, Emily's sister, found Olivia in the kitchen. Her mascara smudged, her voice low. Olivia, I don't mean to pry, but, do you know anyone who might help? Maybe donate services. Anything to make this dream less impossible. Olivia studied the woman's trembling hands. They ask like beggars, not knowing the empire I've built could feed them forever. She exhaled slowly, handing over the lifeline they didn't deserve. I'll take care of it. Everything. The venue, the catering, the hotel. But it stays anonymous. Frank and Emily shouldn't feel indebted. Teresa gasped, tears spilling as she clutched Olivia's hand. You're an angel. Olivia's eyes burned, not with pride, but with unease. Angels don't get written out of invitations. Do they? What I didn't know then, was that my silence and my generosity had just written the script for my own erasure. The first call came on a Wednesday morning, just as sunlight slanted through the blinds of Olivia's corner office. Her desk was a battlefield of quarterly reports and acquisition contracts, but the phone's vibration cut sharper than any deadline. Mrs. Carter, the voice on the line was steady, professional, the tone of someone accustomed to managing chaos. It was Mason, the wedding planner. I need clarification on some conflicting instructions we received yesterday. Olivia straightened in her leather chair, pen poised midair. Conflicting instructions. Yes, ma'am. Your husband called. He asked that your name be removed from all guest lists, seating charts, and announcements. A pause, then softer, but he confirmed the financial arrangements, the 85,000 deposit, remain unchanged. For a moment, Olivia's vision tunneled. The Savannah skyline blurred beyond the glass. Her grip tightened on the pen until it snapped between her fingers. He erased me, but kept my money. He erased me. Just to confirm, Mason continued carefully, you're comfortable with this arrangement. Her voice came out even, though her chest felt crushed by an invisible weight. Mr. Mason, tell me exactly what my husband instructed. He exhaled. He said you'd agreed to step back for family harmony, but that your funding would still apply. We've never encountered a situation like this before. Honestly, my team is uncomfortable proceeding. Olivia pressed the speaker button, setting the phone down as though distance might dull the sting. She leaned back, staring at the skyline, watching the river carve its patient path through the city. 15 years of building an empire, and I am erased with the flick of a pen. To him, I am not wife, not partner. I am a wallet with no seat at the table. The silence between them pulsed. Mason cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, are you still there? Yes, she said, her tone clipped steel. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll address it. When the call ended, she sat frozen. The office around her seemed suddenly foreign. The Waterford Crystal Service gleamed like mockery, the awards on the wall meaningless ornaments. I gave them everything, and this is the repayment. Invisible when convenient, indispensable when costly. Then, another buzz. Her phone lit with Daniel's name. She read the preview of his text. Stop being dramatic. You're not coming to Luke's wedding. The money stays, it was a gift. We'll discuss when you've calmed down. The words sliced deeper than any shouted insult. Dramatic. Gift. Calm down. The language of dismissal. The language men used to silence women who built more than they ever could. Her pulse roared in her ears. She stood, pacing to the wide windows, her reflection fractured by glass panes. Her own eyes stared back, eyes of a woman who had negotiated hostile takeovers, only to be told her outrage was hysteria. Across the desk, acquisition papers waited, proof of an empire Daniel had never built, never touched. Yet at family dinners, she was introduced as Daniel's wife who helps with events. Now even her presence at the wedding she'd funded was recast as unnecessary, disruptive, replaceable. Her assistant knocked lightly. "Ms. Carter, Copper Magnolia Catering is online too. They say there's been confusion about who the primary contact is." Olivia swallowed hard. "Put them through." The voice that followed was hesitant, strained. "Mrs. Carter, we received instructions yesterday to reroute all communications to Paige Carter. But the contracts still list you as financial guarantor. We need clarity. We, frankly, don't understand." Neither did Olivia. Or perhaps she understood all too well. Daniel wasn't just erasing her. He was replacing her, with Paige, with anyone who fit the family narrative better than she did. She closed her eyes. This wasn't an impulsive slight. It was calculated. Systematic. Her nails dug crescents into her palms. "They think I'll stay silent. That I'll keep paying while vanishing quietly." But silence was what got her here. And silence was about to end. Because the one truth Daniel had forgotten was this: every vendor he thought he controlled, every venue he thought was his brother's, ultimately, belonged to me. The first text came like a slap across the face. "Daniel, stop being dramatic. You're not coming to Luke's wedding. The money stays, it was a gift. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down." The words glowed cold on her phone screen. Olivia stared at them until the letters blurred, the Savannah skyline behind her window warping like glass in a storm. Dramatic. Gift. Calm down. 3 blades, each dipped in venom. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She wanted to scream through text, to claw at his arrogance with every truth she had buried for years. But her body refused to move. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the air vent. Another buzz. "Daniel, Luke doesn't need your theatrics. This is his day. Don't ruin it by making everything about you." Olivia's chest constricted. "Making everything about me?" She pressed the phone to her palm, veins pulsing. She had paid for the venue, the catering, the resort rooms. She had erased $85,000 from her accounts without blinking, yet she was the disruption. Her mind replayed dinners, anniversaries, business galas where Daniel introduced her as, "my wife, she helps out with some events." 15 years of swallowing anger. 15 years of letting his family laugh off her empire as a hobby. Buzz. "Daniel, we agreed this was for family harmony. Paige can handle the details without the tension you bring. Just let it go." The audacity tightened around her throat like a noose. "We agreed." She hadn't agreed to anything. He had rewritten the narrative, presenting her silence as consent. Her reflection in the glass stared back, hair pulled into a neat chignon, eyes rimmed red but steady. She whispered to herself, "No, Daniel. You agreed with yourself." The phone buzzed again. "Daniel, you offered the money as a gift. Gifts don't come with strings. If you wanted credit, you should have said so. This way, you just look petty." The text sliced deeper than the rest. Petty. That was the word his family had always murmured in hallways, when Olivia refused to play their endless games of gratitude theater. To them, her success was arrogance. Her generosity, obligation. Her absence, convenience. Her pulse thundered. She typed, then deleted, then typed again. Finally, she sent one line. Olivia, a gift doesn't mean I vanish. Remember that. Seconds stretched. The reply came fast, almost gleeful in its cruelty. Daniel, this is exactly why you shouldn't be there. Emotional outbursts, playing victim. You're proving my point. Her fingers trembled. Emotional outbursts. I am holding myself together with steel threads while you dismantle our life one lie at a time. She set the phone down, but the buzzing wouldn't stop. Each vibration was another attempt to trap her in his version of reality. Daniel, vendors are confused because you're interfering. Paige is the new point of contact. Stop making this harder. Daniel, Frank doesn't need drama at his wedding. Act like an adult. Daniel, if you keep this up, people will think you're unstable. Is that what you want? That last line landed hardest. Unstable. He wasn't just erasing her from the wedding, he was assassinating her character to justify it. Painting her as the hysterical wife, the unstable woman. The narrative was airtight, generous enough to pay, too emotional to attend. Olivia gripped the edge of her desk until her knuckles whitened. This is gaslighting, calculated and merciless. He was framing her silence as proof, her voice as hysteria. Either way, she lost. But not this time. Her phone buzzed once more, and she didn't look. Instead, she turned to the framed acquisition documents on her wall. Each one bore her name, Olivia Carter, in bold black ink. Contracts that couldn't be rewritten. Power that couldn't be erased. She whispered, not to Daniel, not to anyone but herself, they think I'm fragile glass. But I am the hand that holds the glass, and I know exactly when to let it shatter. Because Daniel wasn't the only one with a plan. And mine had already begun to take shape. The phone rang again that evening, but this time it wasn't Daniel. It was Paige. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, almost sympathetic. Olivia, listen, this isn't personal. We're just trying to keep things simple. You know how weddings are, too many personalities can cause tension. Olivia stood in her kitchen, light from the chandelier pooling across the granite counter. She traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger, eyes fixed on the reflection of herself in the sliding glass door. Her own face looked ghostly, like she was fading from her own life. Personalities. Olivia's voice was quiet but edged with steel. I'm the one funding every piece of this wedding. Whose personality, exactly, is the problem? There was a pause, just long enough to confirm guilt. Then Paige chuckled softly, patronizing. Oh, Liv. It's about harmony. Everyone agreed this was best. Everyone agreed. The phrase sliced deeper than Daniel's texts. She pictured them, her husband, his siblings, his mother, sitting together, plotting the best way to cut her out while still cashing her check. Best for whom? Olivia asked. For Luke. For Emily. For family peace. Paige's tone tightened, defensive. You don't want to be the reason their day gets overshadowed, do you? Before Olivia could answer, another call buzzed in. Margaret. She picked up, bracing herself. Olivia, darling, her mother-in-law's voice cooed, dipped in honey but carrying the weight of command. We all appreciate your generosity. Truly. But family situations, they're delicate. Sometimes it's better to step aside for the bigger picture. Olivia's free hand curled into a fist at her side. The bigger picture where I write the check and vanish. That picture. Margaret sighed, as though Olivia were a child refusing bedtime. You're overthinking this. Luke's happiness matters most. Let's not ruin it with unnecessary complications. Complications. That's what she was now. Not wife. Not sister-in-law. Not the builder of the very empire their celebration rested on. A complication to be removed. The next voice came later, Emily, the bride herself. Her words carried sweetness, but the subtext was poison. Olivia, we're so grateful. Frank and I can never thank you enough for making this wedding possible. And we just know you'll understand why the guest list had to change. You're such a generous, selfless person. Olivia closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Grateful. Selfless. Words wielded as chains. They weren't thanking her, they were framing her exclusion as her own virtue. Her reply was steady, but inside she trembled. Emily, generosity doesn't mean invisibility. There was silence on the other end, then a brittle laugh. Of course not. We'll make sure everyone knows how much we appreciate you. Appreciation. But not presence. Gratitude. But not dignity. When the call ended, Olivia sank into the leather chair by her fireplace. The flames flickered, throwing long shadows across the room. Her empire surrounded her, original art on the walls, imported rugs beneath her feet, contracts that bore her name stacked neatly on the table. Proof of her existence. Proof of her worth. Yet in her own family's story, she was being written out line by line. They think this is unity. They think this is peace. But what they don't understand is that this is war, and they've already lost. She took a slow sip of wine, her pulse steadying. Somewhere deep, the shift had already begun. Silence had always been her prison. But now, silence would become her weapon. Because the family who plotted my erasure didn't realize they'd built their dream wedding on an empire that answered to me, and I was done staying quiet. The morning after the family's rehearsed phone calls, Olivia sat at her mahogany desk, the Savannah skyline glinting cold and merciless through the glass. A single folder lay open in front of her, placed there by Avery Kim, her attorney and oldest confidant in business. Before you spiral any further, Avery said, sliding her glasses up her nose, let me show you something you may have forgotten. Inside the folder was a web of corporate structures, subsidiaries, shell companies, holding firms. At the center, one name repeated over and over, Carter Hospitality Group. Olivia's fingers traced the lines connecting each branch. Low Country Events. Ocean's Crest Venue. Marsh and Magnolia Catering. Spanish Moss Resort. Each vendor tied by invisible strings, all nodded back to her. Her breath caught. Every vendor. Avery leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Every single one. Daniel may think he's cut you out, but the infrastructure is yours. The very ground this wedding stands on, you built it. Olivia's pulse quickened, not with panic this time, but with something hotter, cleaner. A slow burn rising from her chest. She stared at the diagram as though it were a treasure map, each line proof of her invisible empire. She remembered the late nights negotiating acquisitions, the contracts signed under hostile terms, the moments she'd been dismissed at conference tables only to emerge holding the deed in her hands. And yet, at family dinners, she had stayed silent, letting them believe she was Daniel's wife who helps with events. They never saw me. And because they never saw me, they built their dream wedding on ground they didn't know I owned. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Daniel. She didn't bother opening it. Instead, she pushed the folder closer, eyes narrowing. Avery, she said slowly, each word deliberate. What if I exercise those ownership rights? Her lawyer didn't flinch. Then the wedding collapses in a day. The words tasted like justice. For the first time in weeks, Olivia felt her shoulders loosen, her breath deepen. It wasn't relief, it was clarity. She rose from her chair, walking to the window. Below, the city pulsed, traffic weaving like veins, buildings jutting sharp against the sky. The reflection staring back at her in the glass looked different. Not erased. Not invisible. Seen, finally, if only by herself. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. They thought silence meant weakness. But silence was strategy. Avery's eyes gleamed. And now? Olivia turned, a thin smile tugging at her lips. Now the silence ends. She gathered the folder, her fingers steady, almost reverent as she closed it. Inside was more than paper, it was leverage, truth, and retribution waiting to be set free. The phone buzzed once more, Daniel's name glowing across the screen. Olivia didn't pick it up. She let it vibrate on the desk, the sound hollow against the wood. He was still trying to control the story with words. But the story was no longer his. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, humiliation, and erasure executed under my own roof. But they'd forgotten the simplest truth of all: you cannot erase the hand that holds the pen. Olivia's lips parted, the whisper meant for no one but herself: checkmate. Because tomorrow, the first domino would fall, and none of them were ready to see who was really pulling the strings. The next morning broke gray and heavy, Savannah's skies draped in clouds like a veil before a storm. Olivia sat at her desk, hair pulled back in a deliberate knot, the folder Avery had prepared spread open in front of her like a playbook. She wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't waiting anymore. She picked up the phone. Start with Ocean's Crest, she told Avery. Compliance review. Permits, fire safety, occupancy limits. Flag every discrepancy. Yes, ma'am. Avery's tone carried the efficiency of someone who knew they were sharpening blades for war. By mid-morning, the first domino fell. The city's compliance office placed Ocean's Crest under a temporary suspension pending documentation updates. No rehearsal could legally take place until those papers were cleared. At 11:07 a.m., another call. Marsh and Magnolia Catering. Their manager's voice was tight. Mrs. Carter, we've just received a notice requesting proof of food safety certifications, staff background checks, and updated insurance forms. Until those are verified, our services are on hold. Olivia leaned back in her chair, letting the words wash over her like music. On hold. The phrase she'd been forced into now turned against them. By noon, Spanish Moss Resort received an internal directive: all block reservations for the Henderson Roads wedding to be suspended pending primary stakeholder approval. Guests who had already confirmed received polite emails suggesting they seek alternative accommodations. Panic rippled like electricity. Her phone lit up, Paige's number. Olivia ignored it. Then Margaret. Ignored again. When Avery walked in with an update, her expression was a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. They're scrambling. Mason just called my office. He said the rehearsal dinner is frozen. He doesn't know who to take instructions from anymore. Olivia's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good. Confusion breeds cracks. Let them feel powerless. She rose from her chair, crossing to the window. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the glass, distorting the city skyline into fractured pieces. In the reflection, Olivia looked taller, sharper, like the storm outside had chosen her as its reflection. They erased me with words. I erase them with systems. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. It was Luke, his voice taut with panic. Olivia, what's going on? The vendors, every single one, are calling me saying services are suspended. Mom's freaking out. Emily's in tears. She let the silence stretch until he stumbled over his own breath. I thought this was just a misunderstanding. Olivia's voice was calm, measured. A misunderstanding ends with an apology, Luke. This is consequence. But the wedding. The wedding is built on contracts that carry my name. Until that's respected, nothing moves forward. There was no anger in her voice, no raised tone. Just truth. And that truth weighed heavier than any scream. Luke faltered. I didn't realize. That's the problem, Olivia cut in. None of you realized. Or maybe you chose not to. She ended the call, setting the phone down with surgical precision. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. For the first time, she felt the scales tilt back into balance. Not with rage. Not with chaos. But with control. And as rehearsal night approached, I knew the cracks I'd carved would burst wide open, for everyone to see exactly who had been holding the power all along. By the time evening fell, the storm outside had become a mirror of the storm brewing within the Carter family. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows of Ocean's Crest, lightning fracturing the Savannah sky in jagged white veins. Inside, the rehearsal dinner should have been glowing with laughter and champagne toasts. Instead, it flickered with confusion and rising panic. Tables sat half-dressed, floral arrangements delivered then hastily carted away after contracts were suspended. The caterers had packed up their trucks hours earlier, citing compliance reviews. Guests arrived in clusters, damp umbrellas in hand, only to be told their rooms at Spanish Moss Resort had been cancelled. Emily stood at the center of the chaos, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Why is this happening? She cried, clutching her dress at the shoulders as though she could keep it from unraveling. Luke paced, phone glued to his ear, calling vendor after vendor, his voice breaking. They all say the same thing. Services suspended. Parent company directives. None of them will budge. At the edge of the room, Paige whispered furiously into her phone. Mason, you told us this was confirmed. Fix it. The planner's voice cracked through the speaker, desperate. I can't. My hands are tied. Every single vendor answers to Carter Hospitality. And right now, Carter Hospitality has frozen the entire wedding. The name hit the air like a gunshot. Heads turned. Guests whispered. Even Margaret's face drained of color, her hands trembling around her wine glass. Daniel stormed into the room, rainwater dripping from his suit. His eyes locked on Luke and Emily, but his words were aimed elsewhere. This is Olivia's doing. She's sabotaging us. Mason's voice, still on speaker, cut through the din. With respect, Mr. Carter, your signature authorized changes you had no right to make. And I have proof. Gasps spread across the room. Paige's phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the hardwood floor. Emily covered her mouth, eyes wide. You forged her consent. Daniel's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary to protect this family. Olivia wasn't in the room, but her presence was everywhere, in every cancelled contract, every unanswered call, every hollow space where flowers, food, and music should have been. Her silence roared louder than thunder, dismantling the illusion of control Daniel had worked so hard to create. Guests began to leave, murmuring about scandals and lawsuits. The glow of celebration dissolved into shadows of humiliation. Luke dropped into a chair, head in his hands. The wedding's over, he muttered. Emily stood rigid beside him, her voice trembling but clear. No. The wedding's not over. The lie is. Daniel's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another frantic vendor update. Instead, one text glared back at him, stark against the dark screen. Olivia, actions have consequences. His hands shook. For the first time, Daniel looked less like a man in control and more like a boy caught stealing. Margaret finally spoke, voice cracking under the weight of shattered dignity. What have you done, Daniel? The storm outside rattled the glass panes. Inside, the rehearsal had collapsed into ruins, flowers wilted, tables bare, families fractured. And Olivia? She sat miles away in her office, glass of wine in hand, watching the lightning illuminate Savannah's skyline. Her lips curled into a whisper only the night could hear. They wanted me gone. Now they'll see what gone really looks like. Because tomorrow, I would face them, not as Daniel's wife, not as their scapegoat, but as the woman who owned the ground beneath their feet. Monday morning, the 32nd floor conference room of Carter Hospitality gleamed like a courtroom built from glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Savannah's skyline, the river shimmering silver in the distance. At the head of the long walnut table sat Olivia, her navy suit cut sharp against the light, a folder of contracts stacked neatly before her. One by one, they filed in. Daniel first, his once confident stride reduced to stiff, uneven steps. Luke and Emily followed, faces pale with sleepless nights. Paige, Margaret, and even Charles Carter slid into leather chairs, their whispers dying in the heavy silence. The air felt thick, charged, as if even the city outside held its breath. Olivia didn't stand to greet them. She simply lifted her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Thank you for coming. We have business to settle." Daniel slammed a hand against the table. "Business? This is family. You humiliated us. You destroyed Luke's rehearsal dinner." Her voice cut across his like a blade. "Correction. I dismantled a fraud built on my money and my erasure. That isn't family, that's theft." The room stilled. Even the hum of the AC seemed to pause. She slid a paper across the table toward Daniel. It was the forged authorization he had submitted, Mason's recording attached as evidence. "You impersonated me. You redirected contracts under Paige's name. That is fraud, Daniel. Civil, criminal. Shall we call it what it is?" His face blanched, lips parting, but no words came. Luke finally spoke, voice hoarse. "Olivia, we never meant." "Stop." She raised a hand, her tone neither loud nor rushed, yet final. "Intentions don't erase actions. The rehearsal collapsed because every vendor ultimately answers to Carter Hospitality. Which means me. You thought I was invisible. You were wrong." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. Margaret shifted uncomfortably, the weight of truth pressing down on all of them. Olivia leaned forward, folding her hands atop the contracts. "Here are my terms. They are not negotiable." The room tightened. 1. A restitution payment of $150,000, wired into Carter Hospitality within 48 hours. 2. Formal, written apologies from Daniel, Paige, and both of you, her eyes cut to Margaret and Charles, acknowledging that my exclusion was an act of betrayal. 3. During the wedding reception, a public acknowledgement of my contribution, and of the disgraceful attempt to erase me. Gasps. Margaret's hand flew to her pearls. Paige sputtered. You can't force us to." Olivia's stare pinned her silent. "You mistook my silence for weakness. I am correcting that mistake." Daniel leaned forward, voice cracking with desperation. "You're overreacting. This was about keeping peace, avoiding drama." Olivia's tone was ice. "Peace is not built on lies and stolen money. Drama isn't created by the woman funding your dream, it's created by the thieves who tried to erase her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain tapped against the glass like a gavel striking wood. Luke stood slowly. His voice, though shaken, carried something the others lacked, remorse. "She's right. We betrayed her. I betrayed her. And if this is what it takes to put it right, then we do it." Daniel's jaw clenched. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. But no one else spoke. Olivia rose finally, the city light flaring behind her. "You have 48 hours. Decide whether Luke and Emily will marry under these terms, or explain to 60 guests why there is no wedding at all." She gathered her folder, turned toward the windows, and let her final words fall like a verdict. "Family loyalty is earned, not extorted. And mine has expired." Because within 2 days, they would either bow to my conditions, or watch their perfect wedding turn to ash. 4 weeks later, the morning sun bathed St. John's Chapel in golden light. Spanish moss swayed from the oaks, and the savanna air carried the faint sweetness of blooming magnolia. Instead of the grand, ostentatious affair once promised, Luke and Emily's wedding had been reborn into something smaller: 40 guests, simple wildflower arrangements, a single-string quartet. It was elegant, understated, intimate. And every detail bore Olivia's fingerprint. As guests filtered in, the whispers that once brimmed with scandal now carried awe. They had all heard fragments of the story: how the woman they dismissed had nearly dismantled an entire wedding, how she alone had the power to restore it. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. Emily stood near the altar, her gown modest but glowing against the stained glass. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her veil. "Olivia," she whispered when they were alone for a moment, "I don't deserve this." "Not after." Olivia placed a hand on her arm, steady, firm. "Tonight isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you build from here." Her eyes softened. "Don't waste the second chance." When the ceremony began, Luke's voice cracked as he spoke his vows, but it was his speech at the reception that shifted the air entirely. He rose, glass in hand, scanning the intimate gathering. "Before Emily and I exchange vows tonight, there's something I need to say. Our wedding exists because of one person. Olivia Carter." All eyes turned. Olivia felt the weight of it, this time not as judgment, but as recognition. Luke's voice steadied. "She didn't just fund our day. She reminded us what integrity looks like when it's tested. We betrayed her trust, but she gave us back more than we ever deserved. That's strength. That's family." Applause rippled through the room, not polite this time, but genuine, long, sustained, filled with something that felt like repentance. Emily stepped forward, tears spilling freely. "Olivia, I want to apologize. Publicly. We excluded you while clinging to your generosity. That was selfish. It was cruel. And still, you gave us a wedding more meaningful than we could have imagined." Her words cracked, but the sincerity held. "I promise I'll remember this for the rest of my life. You taught me that gratitude without respect isn't gratitude at all." The chapel fell silent, sunlight streaming across Olivia's face. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not for what she provided, but for who she was. Later, as the couple danced beneath the fading light, Olivia stood near the chapel doors, glass of champagne in hand. Daniel lingered in the corner, subdued, his usual dominance stripped bare. He didn't approach. He couldn't. Olivia inhaled deeply, letting the moment settle. They wanted spectacle. I gave them substance. They wanted me erased. I became unforgettable. The music swelled, wildflowers trembled in the evening breeze, and the chapel glowed with a warmth no extravagant budget could have bought. But while Luke and Emily stepped into their new beginning, I knew my own ending with Daniel was approaching, and it would not be written in vows, but in finality. 3 months later, the Savannah sun rose over a different life. Olivia's Range Rover sat in the driveway of her new home, miles from the house she once shared with Daniel. The papers were signed, the marriage dissolved, not with rage, but with clarity. Carter hospitality had grown stronger than ever, its reputation burnished by the storm. Competitors now treated her as more than a businesswoman, they treated her as a force. Industry leaders whispered her name with respect. Even Luke and Emily, humbled, had started a scholarship fund in her honor, acknowledging that the woman they once erased had become their anchor. And Daniel? He sent roses, voicemails, proposals of reconciliation. But Olivia never answered. Some betrayals are not wounds to be healed, but truths to be lived with. One evening, as twilight spilled lavender light across her office, Olivia lifted a glass of wine and faced her reflection in the window. The woman who stared back was no longer invisible. No longer silent. She had whispered for 15 years. Now, her silence had become thunder. She turned to the camera, her voice steady, resonant. If you've ever been underestimated, if your generosity has been twisted into weakness, remember this: you are not invisible. Your voice, your boundaries, your worth, they matter. Don't let anyone convince you that giving means disappearing. Because when you stop whispering and start standing, the world will listen. Her gaze held firm, unflinching. So tell me, have you ever been written out of a story you paid to create? What did you do when you realized your silence was being used against you? Share it in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, subscribe, because quiet strength deserves to be heard. As the screen faded to black, Olivia's final words lingered like an echo, both a warning and a promise. Actions have consequences. And sometimes, silence is the sharpest blade of all.